Chapter 33. Arvis's Heaven. Word spread quickly through Arvis that Leila, the girl that Bill Remmer was raising, had gotten into Rats University. Simultaneously, the word was spreading that Dr. Etnan's only son had been admitted into the same university's medical school after passing the entrance exam with flying colours. But this news didn't generate as much buzz, since everyone had already expected it to happen. Leila's news was a different story, however. For several days, whenever two or more people met, Leila Llewellyn would inevitably become a topic of their conversation. This was even true of conversations that went on in the Duke's greenhouse.
To think a common orphan and a female one at that is going to college. Bill Remmer must have done an amazing job raising her,
said Dowager Herhart. Normally she wouldn't participate in gossiping about a lowly child, but today she was displaying just as much interest in Leila as anyone.
She must have been born lucky. First, she met her savior, Bill, and then she managed to get engaged to Dr. Etnan's son.
Elise von Herhart added. Claudine, who had been quietly sipping her tea, politely smiled and nodded. I'm so happy that poor girl has had such good luck. She felt more capable than ever of sincerely praising Leila. Just then, a maid that Dowager Herhart had instructed to go to the cottage returned, accompanied by Leila, who was very neatly dressed.
Come here and have a seat,
Dowager Herhart calmly said. Leila's eyes were wide with surprise, as were those of Lady Herhart and Claudine.
There's nothing wrong with offering a cup of tea to a special girl, is there?
Dowager Herhart asked, smiling. While all the Herharts were aloof, blue-blooded aristocrats, Katharina von Herhart was especially so. Thus, it came as a shock to everyone that she would invite an orphan girl raised by a gardener to tea. With a nervous look on her face, Leila sat in the seat that the maid guided her to. As soon as Leila's tea had been served, Dowager Hart began.
So, I heard that you have been admitted into a university that even sons from the most distinguished families have trouble getting into.
It's all thanks to Uncle Bill,
Leila replied, her eyes lowered politely.
Of course. We mustn't forget your saviour, Bill Remmer.
Indeed, ma'am.
I hear you're from Lovita.
Yes, ma'am. My mother was from Lovita, but my father was from Berg.
You and I are alike in that respect.
Elise and Claudine reacted with shock at this casual comment. Dowager Herhart's father had been a prestigious marquess who was related to the Berg imperial family, while her mother came from the Lovita royal family's bloodline. It was astounding that she was comparing her lineage to that of a poor orphan girl.
Tell me something that you would like to receive,
Dowager Herhart said, setting down her teacup. Leila was taken aback by this sudden command.
Bill Remmer is one of my favourite employees. You're like a daughter to him, so I would like to give you a congratulatory gift,
Dowager Herhart calmly said. Out of surprise, Leila forgot her manners and stared straight at Dowager Herhart. Meanwhile, two more people entered the greenhouse. Ah, Duke Herhart, Claudine exclaimed with delight. Everyone looked in the direction of Claudine's gaze, including Leila. Matias von Herhart was standing by the table. He made eye contact with Leila, whereupon they both frowned for different reasons. There was a slight feeling of tension in the room, until Leila removed it by averting her eyes.
This girl has been admitted into Rats University. We wanted to congratulate her, so we invited her to have a cup of tea with us,
Elise von Herhart said, smiling as she explained the unusual situation. Matias nodded and sat down next to Claudine, in a seat that just happened to be right across from Leila's. You're back early, Claudine said to her fiancé, smiling at him tenderly. Now that he had taken full charge of the family's business, Matias usually left the mansion early in the morning and didn't return until late at night. It had already been a week since Claudine had arrived for her visit to Arvis, but this was the first time she had seen him return home while it was still light out.
The meeting ended earlier than expected, my lady.
That's good to hear. I've been worried that you've been overworking yourself lately.
Claudine is right, Matias. You shouldn't overdo things when it comes to work, or it could have an impact on your health,
Elise von Herhart remarked. The conversation at the tea table then turned to Matias's situation and the family business. In an instant, it was as if Leila was no longer there. Thanks to this, she was able to catch her breath and take a sip of her tea, which by now was lukewarm. She wanted nothing more than to escape this uncomfortable situation, but she couldn't leave without first being excused, especially with the Duke's mother and grandmother there. She set her cup down on the saucer, trying not to make a sound as she did so. Then she absent-mindedly looked up, and was so startled by what she saw, she flinched and pushed her body into the back of her chair. Matias, sitting between his fiancée and his mother while they chatted, was looking straight at her. His cold eyes looked exactly the same as they had looked the day he had trampled on her heart. Rather than reaching for her cup again, she hurriedly put her hands under the table. Matias's gaze then turned to Claudine as she began to speak with him. When Claudine started speaking with Elise again, his gaze returned to Leila. Leila quickly lowered her head, but she could still feel his burdensome gaze on her. Soon, memories from the previous summer began to flood into her mind. Recalling those memories while in Claudine's presence made her feel even worse. A chill went down her spine. Matias was the one who had committed the wrongdoings, but Leila was the one who felt guilty.
So, have you thought of something you would like to receive?
Dowager Herhart asked. With this question, the table's attention returned to Leila. Leila reflexively lifted her head upon hearing her name, then unwittingly started biting her lip. This was because Matias's blue eyes were still fixed on her. Trying to hide her anxiety, she quickly turned to face Dowager Herhart and replied,
You have already given me a huge gift, ma'am. I don't need anything more.
You already received a gift.
Yes. Simply by allowing me to stay at Uncle Bill's cottage here in Arvis, you've done more for me than I'll ever be able to repay you for. It's the biggest, most wonderful gift I've ever received, and I'm eternally grateful for it.
All we did was approve Bill's request.
Your approval of that request was a gift that changed my whole life, ma'am.
A slight smile formed on her lips.
My deepest thanks to you as well, Lady Herhart,
she said, turning to Elise.
And also to you, Your Grace. And you, Miss Claudine.
Since the only thing she really wanted at that moment was to be allowed to leave, which was a request she knew she couldn't make. She instead expressed her thanks to all these people that she didn't particularly care for.
I'll never forget the kindness you've extended to me, even after I depart from Arvis.
She then bowed her head deeply, to indicate her polite refusal of any further gift. Dowager Herhart looked closely at her for a moment, then nodded. The act of refusing the Herhart family's generosity was bold, but Leila had expressed this refusal in a highly refined manner, not at all what one would expect from a girl of such lowly upbringing.
You're already saying your goodbyes? That makes me sad, Leila,
Claudine said.
I understand how you feel, but we would still like to give you a gift. How about we pay your tuition?
No, miss. I'm happy to accept the kindness you've already shown me as my gift,
Leila replied, still smiling politely.
Uncle Bill has already saved up the money for my tuition. He told me he really wants to pay for my first semester of college.
Really? Then we'll have to think of something else. I can't let an old friend leave empty-handed when she's just gotten into college and gotten engaged.
Smiling, she turned to Matias.
Isn't that right, Duke Herhart?
Her voice was as sweet as honey as she gently pressured him. He glanced at Leila for a moment, then lightly nodded his head. After exchanging a few more pleasantries and salutations, Leila was finally free to leave this uncomfortable tea table. As she was walking away from the Herharts, she was able to take in the interior of the greenhouse. Everyone who visited it praised it enthusiastically, calling it Arvis's heaven. Now that Leila was able to look around the lavish greenhouse, she felt uneasy. Seeing all the beautiful birds with clipped wings and all the excessively colourful and fragrant flowers, she started to feel overwhelmed. This feeling was heightened by the sound of the water flowing in the marble fountain, and by the sunlight that was intensified as it shone through the glass walls. She left the greenhouse immediately, not looking back once. Only once she was outside, in the gentle embrace of the breeze and the natural sunlight, was she able to breathe a sigh of relief. Her long evening shadow followed her as she walked back towards the woods.
Linda, do you know what you're saying right now?
Daniel Rayner asked in disbelief. The rays of the setting sun flowing in through the uncurtained window made him squint as he sat across from his cousin, Linda Ettman.
Linda!
Lower your voice, Daniel,
she said. Her face remained amazingly calm as she glanced at the closed door. Daniel let out a distressed moan. After a failed investment in an overseas mining venture had caused his financial situation to go downhill quickly, he had gone several times to ask for help from his richest relative, his cousin Linda Ettman. Each time he had asked, she had given him a cold yet graceful rejection. But much to his surprise, this time, she had come to see him and offer to help him willingly. Of course, he hadn't expected the help to come for free. But when he heard what she wanted him to do in exchange, it made him hesitate despite the dire straits he was in.
That's stealing, Linda. How could I?
No, Mrs. Ettman said, cutting him off. She slowly closed and opened her eyes, then said,
It's just briefly hiding something and then putting it back.
But...
Don't you care about Kyle?
Of course I do.
And you need my help, don't you?
She lifted her hands from her lap and rubbed her temples. Daniel's face started to flush, but he stopped trying to argue, just as she knew he would.
You'll take the money, and then when the time comes you'll put it back. That's it. By doing that simple favor for me, you'll be able to protect your family, and I'll be able to protect my son.
Straightening her posture, she looked into his eyes.
Sounds like a pretty good deal to me. What do you think, Daniel?
AudiosKoppo